He should have died that day, but somehow he didn't. In the bitter cold of the North Atlantic, where the ocean turns black under storm clouds and the wind screams like a living thing, a single ship struggled against the impossible. It was April 1912, and aboard that ship were over 2,000 people. Dreamers, workers, families, and adventurers, each believing they were part of something extraordinary. The ship was called the RMS Titanic. At the time, it was the largest moving object ever built by humans. Engineers called it unsinkable. Newspapers praised it as a triumph of modern science. Passengers boarded with pride, stepping into a floating palace filled with luxury, music, and hope. But beneath that confidence, the ocean waited. Among the passengers was a young wireless operator named Harold Bride. Quiet, intelligent, and observant, he spent most of his time in a small room filled with telegraph equipment, sending and receiving messages across the Atlantic. It was a new kind of communication, instant, magical, and powerful. That night, April 14th, Harold was tired. Messages had been pouring in all day. Wealthy passengers sent personal notes to loved ones, and other ships transmitted warnings about ice ahead. The Atlantic that year was unusually dangerous, filled with massive drifting icebergs that could destroy even the strongest ships. But the Titanic kept moving forward. At around 11:40 p.m., everything changed. A sudden jolt ran through the ship. It wasn't violent, just a long, scraping vibration, like metal brushing against something enormous. Many passengers barely noticed. Some even laughed it off. But Harold noticed something different. The wireless room door opened, and Captain Edward Smith stepped in. His face was calm, but his eyes told a different story. "We've struck an iceberg," he said quietly. "Send out a distress signal." At that moment, history shifted. Harold and his senior operator, Jack Phillips, immediately began sending messages. At first, they used the traditional distress signal, CQD. But then, Harold suggested something new, an experimental signal that hadn't been widely used yet. SOS. It was simple, urgent, impossible to ignore. They tapped it out over and over again into the night. Meanwhile, below deck, the damage was worse than anyone imagined. The iceberg had torn open multiple compartments of the ship. Water rushed in relentlessly. Engineers quickly realized the truth. The Titanic was not unsinkable. It was doomed. Still, above deck, the atmosphere was strangely calm. The band continued to play music. Crew members reassured passengers. Lifeboats were prepared, but there weren't enough for everyone. Harold stayed at his post. Message after message was sent into the darkness, calling for help. Nearby ships responded, but many were too far away. Time was slipping. As the hours passed, the tilt of the ship became noticeable. Cold air bit into exposed skin. Panic began to spread. Eventually, Captain Smith returned. "You've done your duty," he told the operators. "Now save yourselves." But Harold didn't leave immediately. He kept sending signals, hoping someone, anyone would hear. Finally, when it was clear that staying any longer meant certain death, he prepared to leave. But as he tried to escape, something unexpected happened. A crew member suddenly attacked him. In the chaos, some people had begun trying to steal life jackets or force their way into lifeboats. The man lunged at Harold, attempting to take his vest. What followed was a desperate struggle. Harold fought back, fueled by adrenaline and fear. The two men grappled in the dim light of the cabin. At one point, Harold managed to strike the man, possibly knocking him unconscious. It was a brutal, terrifying moment, but it saved his life. With no time to think, Harold fled toward the deck. By now, the ship was tilting heavily. Water surged across the lower levels. Screams filled the air. And then came the moment no one could escape. The Titanic began its final descent.
Harold found himself thrown into the freezing ocean as the ship disappeared beneath the surface. The shock of the cold was instant and overwhelming. The water was near freezing, so cold that most people lost consciousness within minutes. But somehow, Harold stayed alive. He struggled through the dark water, surrounded by debris and desperate survivors. The screams of hundreds echoed across the ocean, slowly fading one by one. Then, through sheer luck, he found something: an overturned, collapsible lifeboat. Dozens of men clung to it, balancing carefully to avoid capsizing. Harold pulled himself up, barely conscious, his body shaking uncontrollably. The cold was merciless. His hands began to freeze. His feet went numb. Every second felt like an eternity. Around him, men slipped into the water and disappeared. But Harold held on. Hours passed. Finally, as dawn approached, a rescue ship arrived, the Carpathia. Survivors were pulled aboard one by one. When Harold was lifted from the lifeboat, he could barely move. His hands were so badly frozen that they were nearly useless. Yet, he was alive. Out of over 2,000 people on the Titanic, more than 1,500 had died. It was one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. Harold Bride was one of the few who survived. In the days that followed, he became a key witness. Despite his injuries, he continued working, helping transmit survivor lists and messages aboard the rescue ship. Even after facing death, even after enduring unimaginable fear, he returned to the very task that had defined him: communication, connection, responsibility. His survival was not just luck, it was a combination of quick thinking, resilience, and an unbreakable will to live. Years later, when people spoke of the Titanic, they often focused on its grandeur, its tragedy, and its loss. But hidden within that story were individuals like Harold, ordinary people placed in extraordinary situations. People who faced the impossible and somehow survived. The ocean still holds the wreck of the Titanic today, resting silently in the darkness of the deep sea. It is a reminder of human ambition and human vulnerability. But it is also a reminder of something else: that even in the coldest, darkest moments, survival is possible. That even when everything is lost, one decision, one action, one moment of courage can change everything. Harold Bride was not a hero in the traditional sense. He didn't seek fame or glory. He simply did what he had to do. And because of that, he lived to tell the story. A story that more than a century later still sends chills down the spine of anyone who hears it. Because deep down, we all ask the same question: if we were there, would we have survived?